This is TWiT.
My guest today, I'm super excited to talk to. Anya Kamenetz is an NPR reporter for NPR Education. She is their lead education blogger, and she covers online and on air, covering learning and technology. And she has authored several books, including most recently, The Art of Screen Time, How Your Family Can Balance Digital Media and Real Life. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
So I wanted to start by asking you to read a little passage from your book, because I think a lot of people, when they hear we're going to talk about this topic, especially in the past week when, since the World Health Organization has declared gaming disorder as a disease, there's a lot of people who are feeling like, just not another person who's spreading FUD, like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, not another person who's just going to make us more anxious, criticize our parenting. So I wanted to read a little passage from the very beginning of the book to give an idea of what the writing is like.
I'm so happy you asked me to do this. It's like no one's ever asked me to do this. So this is from the first chapter. This is The Art of Screen Time, Digital Parenting in the Real World. And I'm kind of talking about how why I felt like I needed this book and what's changed and what's maybe the same. So children today first engage with digital media at the average age of 4 months, or almost as soon as they can focus past the end of their noses. In the 1970s, that average age was 4 years. And according to a Pew survey in 2015, almost half of parents of school-age children say that their children spend too much time with screens. On average, kids in the United States spend as much time daily with electronic media as on any other waking activity, including school. Astonishing. But so what? As parents, we find ourselves without traditions or folk wisdom or, crucially, enough relevant scientific evidence in answering that question. Traditional authorities covering for real gaps in knowledge fall back on tired tropes. And I think the self-proclaimed experts have let us down in our attempt to make sense of this incredible new reality. In the absence of grandma's advice or a wealth of up-to-date research studies, the source of knowledge that we consult to resolve not only these conflicts, but seemingly every question and hiccup in our children's lives and our own is, ironically, the internet. Dr. Google is the new Dr. Spock.
So this book, once I read that, I was like, okay, I'm in. As you can see, I have many Post-it notes throughout the book, notes from my own life. And what I like is you have much smaller kids than I do. My kids are teenagers, but you're really not, even though I saw recently you gave a talk to the Family Action Network and called this Me Search, when you really research something that you need, but you really covered all of the ages, and also just the fact that as parents, specifically mothers, we have a lot of a lot of issues with this too, and so I want to get to that. But one of my favorite things about your book was that you borrowed from Michael Pollan, the food writer. He said, eat too much, eat food. Not too much.
Not too much.
Not too much. Mostly vegetables. Is that what he said? Mostly
plants.
Mostly plants. Yes. And you said use screens not too often, mostly together. And I love that. That's such an inspiration. So can you talk a little bit about how you came to that?
Yeah. First of all, people are busy, so I wanted to have a handle on the book that people could kind of understand the message pretty quickly. And I understand the message of balance, but I think that we've been shortchanging ourselves when we talk to parents and we just talk about cutting back. And that is sort of the not too much part of the equation. I think that's part of it. But the enjoy screens and the mostly together are kind of the other parts of my message, where I say, hey, wait a minute, this digital technology, it's in our lives for a reason. It connects us to new ideas. It helps us express ourselves creatively. It helps us discover new things in the world, discover new affinities. And we want to share that with our children. And so the way that we do that is by using screens together, by engaging over digital media and modeling types of use that are going beyond kind of the consumption that everybody loves to beat up on. Although, I put in a word there for consumption too. Fandom and sharing stories together are not, beyond the pale. It's also part of the healthy, balanced media diet. That's kind of the bottom line.
And so, we hear tons of research, some junk science, some based on years of research long before the iPhone or the computer came around.
Yeah.
But there haven't been, we're only very soon getting longitudinal studies on what smartphones and technology like that are doing to our children. So talk a little bit about like the problems with the research that's out there right now.
Yeah, I think every practitioner would say the problems with the research is that there's not enough of it and not enough funding and not enough non-biased funding. So the point that drives this home is the last major federally funded study on children and media was published in 1982 by the National Institute of Mental Health. I'm sorry. So there's clearly a lot that's been going on that we don't have up-to-date research on. And if you think about how hard it is to design a study for children in particular, especially when we have some indicators that media might not be so helpful or might be harmful, it's really, really hard to get approval for that kind of research. And so the studies that we do have, they're not necessarily experimental. They're not randomized controlled studies. And it's really hard then to draw as powerful conclusions as many people are from the studies we do have.
Right. No one's willing to say, okay, give me 100 babies. We're going to give them an iPhone and tape it to their fingers for the next 10 years and see what happens.
Yeah, there might be a few people who would volunteer for that, but then they would have different things going on at home that we don't really want to think about too much.
So what is some of the research that you looked into for kids or adolescents that you felt wasn't junk science, that really did have some reality in it?
So the stuff I found compelling, it was a combination of the amount of research over time as well as how well researchers understood the mechanisms behind it. And the number one thing I landed on was sleep. We know that the light that's shining in our eyes and close to our faces, especially that blue-toned light, is inhibiting your body's ability to make melatonin, which is what you need to be sleepy and feel sleepy. This is especially impactful for kids and teens. Their brains are developing. They need sleep to consolidate their memories and learning. And sleep also has a lot of emotional impact on children as they grow. When they're underslept, it regresses their ability to tolerate frustration, and they get very moody. And there's a paradigm of a kid who is hyperactive, has a lot of trouble settling down, and you give them screens, which just seems like it's calming them, but really it's very stimulating. And so they might get into a vicious circle where they didn't sleep well the night before, and then they're kind of all over the place, and you give them screens again because they're kind of craving that stimulation because their brains are kind of locked into needing more and more. So the sleep is one big area. Obviously, obesity, we have a lot of research on, mostly related to television. And that has to do with potentially the advertising messages more than anything else, as well as potentially mindless eating while you're watching. And those are the two areas that I think that seem to be the most well-founded. They're very basic. They're not necessarily the biggest bugaboos that parents worry about. But especially when it comes to sleep, they can be insidious, and they obviously affect parents as well.
Yeah, and that's definitely what I've found, my experience of I will fall back a lot on what I think, even you write about the common thing we do is compare ourselves to other parents, and it's just built in. But, the parents it's always been shocking to me, parents who are very concerned with like the types of media, like violent video games or, rated R movies, and then will allow their child to keep their iPhone in their bedroom all night because it's their alarm clock. Like that's,
right.
And it's like, well, buy an alarm clock,
Right.
But so it's just something. And I think what's interesting when you're talking about those two things is like, that's a good rule for kids and adults, keeping your phone somewhere not near your bed, and also not sitting in front of the TV watching watching TV and eating, bad for your food.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. A lot of this stuff is really common sense. And another point I would add to that is that when it comes to dangers to kids with media and digital devices, probably the number one is parents driving with phones in their hands, like just by the numbers, because school-age children, car crashes are the number one cause of death. And phones are pushing up the level of car crashes that we have. So, this is not something that you see when you have a digital safety curriculum, but I think it should be front and center in people's minds. And And another area, for example, where there's a fair amount of evidence that's interesting and kind of a sleeper one is background television. So we know from decades of research, first of all, very large chunk of parents by surveys still have the TV on all or almost all of the time that they're at home. And what we can see from the research is that there's a giant drop in parent-child conversation when the television's on. And that for small children, their play gets interrupted when they're television on, even if it's quote unquote in the background. And I was actually just speaking to parents of a baby who were in a research intervention where they were actually recording their baby's speech. And this is the number one thing that they noticed. They said, we had our baby, we brought her home, and we used to just like switch on the television for a little bit of downtime. And we noticed how we didn't have that conversation, that interaction when the television was on. And so now we don't do it anymore. And so I wonder how much parents, and these are all things, it's not a coincidence I'm pointing to things that parents could be doing differently when it comes to kids and media.